Hey, Charlie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So my name's Charlie, and I'm the lead data scientist at Carv. So yeah, I spend my time designing metrics and building ski IQ and algorithms to detect when you're skiing, or other types of things we've worked on are what terrain you might be skiing on. That's a current work in progress. But yeah, so that's me. I'll pass over to back to Amelia.
Charlie didn't mention, but he is currently dialing in from home with absolute commitment to the Carv event cause, having recently recovered from a not great skiing injury. So thank you, Charlie. Kevin and Thomas, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. My name is Kevin Jordan, and this is Thomas Roennau. I'm actually going to introduce Thomas. Thomas is the one who actually got me into Carv. He's the one who had a set a couple of years ago, actually put him into my boots, and then taught me a lot about the app. So I really owe a bunch of that learning about Carv, and we're really excited to talk about Balance. He's a two-time technical director of the Danish Ski Federation, and he's also been on the Danish interski team. So I'm excited to be doing a webinar with him.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And alongside me is Kevin. Kevin's a national team member for the US team, and he's actually one of the few that's an examiner in 3 different disciplines. So he's got freestyle and kids examining on top of his normal being an examiner. So Kevin is actually part of a newly started company that's called Carv Performance Institute, where he's one of our top coaches. So great to have you, Kevin.
Yeah, we were very excited to see the birth of the CPI this year. And I'm sure you'll mention more on it at the end, but it is a great new Carv related entity in Aspen. Yeah, pop in the Q&A if you have any questions, and I can answer as you go along. And that stands for everything. If you have any questions related to anything that we talk about, technique related, Carv related, pop them in the Q&A box. And if I can't answer them as we go, I will save them for the end for our pros to answer. And if we don't get to them, I apologize in advance. I do take them as they come in, but there are always more than we can answer. And if you have a question that you really want answered and isn't answered, please reach out to us through the Carv app or on the Facebook group, and we will get back to you there, I promise. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we will kick off. There we go. Can you see okay? Perfect. So whilst we're here, I'm actually going to start, if I can, and launch another poll, but it is always tricky when I'm trying to do everything from one. Might not be able to get it up. Where's it gone? Sorry, everyone. Bear with me. I'm going to launch it whilst we're in here, and then we'll share screen. I'd love to know from everyone what metric you struggle with the most. So we started with balance for obvious reasons that Kevin and Thomas will come on to discuss. But I also personally think it's one of the hardest ones out there. That's off my own experience using Carv, and off the experience that we've kind of inferred from lots of people on the Carv skiers community. And the poll is also conclusive. 52% of people saying balance is the hardest, edging followed, then pressure, and then rotary. You can have a look here. So with that knowledge, it's a good job we're starting with it. Maybe it's a bit of an echo chamber, that's why you're all here too. But that's all good. Has that disappeared off your screen now? Yeah. Perfect. So in this session, we are going to run through, first of all, why balance is so important. Obviously, it's something that you all have struggled with to some degree at some point. We are all human, and it is a tricky metric. Then we're going to go into how we measure it, which is Charlie's area of expertise. And then Kevin and Thomas will talk about how you can improve it. They've got lots of drills and top tips from their experience teaching that they're going to share with you. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Thomas and Kevin to talk about why balance is so important and what it means.
All right, well, thank you, Amelia. And yeah, we're obviously this webinar, we're talking about balance, and it's one of the first metrics, and it's one, like, we're excited for this webinar too, because we're going to learn a lot from Charlie of how Carv actually measures it and everything like that. But really, when you think about balance, something that we wanted to get across is it's not so much just balance, like the noun, it's actually more like a verb of balancing, right? And so it's more like you're going to be moving. Let's face it, skiing is a very dynamic sport, and regardless of what country you're coming from, you know, balance is definitely one of those fundamental pieces, and you can focus on it a couple different ways. But what we figured is we would actually just, you know, what is balance? So balance is somewhat the ability to actually manage instability or unstableness. That makes sense, because stability is actually the ability to resist forces. So we thought would be kind of fun to do, and we can't see you from the screen, but we were actually going to do a little fun activity here. We're actually going to get you guys to stand up. And I don't know if you can see me, maybe up here, but come up to the chair. Whoa. I'm already bouncing right there. But if you just stand up and you kind of see my feet in there, ideally, what you want to do is you're just standing with your feet somewhat close together. You know, you're somewhat stable, you're balancing. If you were to stand on one foot, now all of a sudden I change from being somewhat imbalanced to balancing. So that's something you can do right there from the comfort of your own home or computer or whatever. But we just figured we wanted to make that point of, you know, you're actually trying to move and you're trying to balance.
Yeah, and I think moving is one of the things I love about Carv. For a lot of us, it makes us move more while skiing. And I brought my little goal here. And for people that don't move skiing, it looks more like this. We're better skiers, the better we get, the more we move, because that's a move, that's angulation right here. So moving makes us look like we're not moving. Where if we don't move, it makes us look like we're not as good skiers. So yeah, that's part of balancing.
And we also know from the poll that was pretty conclusive that people tend to struggle with this. Also from the Carv community, you know, a lot of posts on Facebook, and just people are saying, hey, how do I get better at this score? And Amelia, you could probably pull up some of those real quick. You know, here's some where it's like, how do I get better at this? So this is why we are focusing on this today. Okay. So again, just to point out, you know, so balancing, you know, so it depends which country or system you're kind of in, but the idea is balance is important, right? And we've already covered that it's balancing and the whole idea of some stability, but it's also some movement, like along the length of the ski, right? And so in the ski, you have a tip and you also have a tail, and that's something to think about. So it's how do you move along the length of that ski? And you know, I actually work a little bit in the mountain bike world, and one of the first fundamentals in the mountain bike world is actually position and balance. So there's that key word again, the balance, and the foundation of how am I moving and how am I staying in balance when something might knock me off my feet or something might, you know, kind of hit me and I have to react to that. So it's a little bit about how I react to it and also how I can move along the ski.
Yeah, and that's what we do. We might have what we call the stands, but in general, we're moving all the time while skiing. We're adapting to terrain. We're adapting to outside forces that are changing throughout the turn. And if any of you watched Tom Gelly in one of his webinars, he talked about the turn is like a half pipe. And we had Amelia take the half pipe feel and twist it up so it matched the turn. Because if you're in a half pipe, everyone who's tried that knows that you lean forward at entering the half pipe and you lean back going up the other side. And if we take that half pipe and twist it, we get it going forward into the top of the turn and going backwards from that forward position out of the turn or into the transition to the next turn. So we stole that from Tom Gelly, and it gives a really good visual. Another one that I like to use is if you're standing in the middle aisle of a bus and the bus is accelerating, you move slightly forward. And when it decelerates, you move back again. That's the feeling of skiing. Yeah.
So what we're going to do right now is we're going to hand it over to Charlie and talk a little bit more about how Carv actually measures this balance score. And then we'll come back and we'll talk to you guys a little bit about, and guys and gals, how we can improve the score. Some drills that we can do that we found have helped improve our scores. Thomas has also taught a bunch using Carv as a tool to help and understand some of the pieces with his students. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but we're going to hand it over to Charlie first.
Not without technical errors from me, you won't.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Okay.
Cool. So yeah, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the history of how we've measured balance at Carv, how I measure it now, and then I've got some video and raw data examples of different ability levels to dive into. So yeah, to start with, at Carv, we objectively measure skiing technique through analyzing the raw data streams coming out of our sensors. So the headline metric is ski IQ, which is the measure of general skiing ability, but it's made up of all these individual metrics that we measure for every single turn that you do. And each metric is measuring a different type of or different aspect of skiing technique. And we group these metrics into the 4 key categories of balance, edging, rotary, and pressure. So now I'm going to run through each of those categories in a little bit more detail before diving into balance. So when we think about balance in the eyes of Carv, what we are thinking about is how you're applying pressure to the insert and how that pressure is moving around on the insole. So edging is looking at how you're tipping your ski on edge. And we look at things like how high, how early, and how smooth you're doing this. Pressure is looking at the kind of total pressure going through the insole, not the movement of where you're applying it, but just how much it is and how smooth that application of pressure and how much of it you have. And then rotary, you can think of as the shape of your turn. So your skis leave a track in the snow, and we're basically looking at characteristics of that track. So how similar they are between your skis and how round it is, that sort of thing. So before I move on, balance, as Amelia mentioned, is often the hardest category for people to score well in, especially in comparison to their other categories. Many of you would have found this, I'm sure, and I've had this myself as well. And I just wanted to address why that is. So there's 2 main reasons. The first one is that the best skiing technique puts pressure through the foot, mainly through the foot and not through the shin. But it is possible to become a pretty advanced skier mainly using shin pressure. But I think Thomas is going to talk about this in more detail later potentially. But what happens when you overuse the shin is that you lock your ankle joint and it limits your performance. So it's possible to get to a high level of skiing, a pretty high level of skiing with decent IQs. But to really master skiing and get to the best of your ability, you need to be manipulating pressure under the foot. A byproduct of using the shin is obviously that Carv has the insole under the foot. So the more shin pressure you use, the less that we're measuring there. The second reason is boot fit. So if your boots are not fitted correctly, it can impact the internal mechanics of the boot, which can then in turn result in lower balance scores. So I'd really advise anyone who's really struggling with balance to go and see your local boot fitter. Hopefully they know about Carv and can think through how Carv should interface with your foot and the ski boot. But yeah, one example of a boot that doesn't fit properly means that as you apply pressure to the shin, it lifts the heel of the boot, which then presses the sensors at the back of the insole into your heel, which means you're kind of moving forwards, but your Carv reads that your rear sensors are lighting up, which means in Carv's eyes you're moving back. So yeah, those are the two main reasons why people get lower balance scores than their other categories. So yeah, now we move on to how we actually measure balance. So we have 36 pressure sensors under the foot, and what we're looking at is how much pressure is going through each sensor, and importantly, we know the location of each sensor. So what this allows us to do is to calculate something that we call the center of pressure, which is the average location of pressure going through your foot. So if you're standing still on a flat surface, this will be in the middle of your foot, and as you move forwards, this will go forwards. This example on the left shows someone moving their weight from their heels to the balls of their foot. This would move this center of pressure dot forwards. Likewise, if you move side to side, this center pressure dot will move side to side. So we call these two axes of movement fore aft, which is the forwards and backwards movement, and side to side, which we call lateral. Cool. So yeah, now I'm going to give you the rundown of the history of how we measured, how we've been measuring balance at Carv. So to start with, we actually just really looked at how centered your balance was during the turn. So we knew that it was bad to be in the front seat and in the back seat, and you wanted to have a centered stance. So what we did was basically check to see how near the center of your foot this center of pressure dot was. And the way we measured that was a score of 0 meant that you were right in the back of your boot, 100 was right at the front, and 50 was in the middle. And you can actually still use this monitor. This is now a monitor called the fore aft ratio monitor. So what we found was that becoming an intermediate skier and being able to do a parallel turn, basically there was a prerequisite that you were pretty centered, and most skiers of an intermediate level plus were pretty centered, and it wasn't a great way of distinguishing between the very best skiers and the rest of us. So yeah, we knew that we wanted to get better at this, and in the summer of 2020 we spoke to Tom Gelly about his ideas of dynamic balance. Those of you that haven't heard of Tom, he's a world-renowned ski instructor with a particular focus in biomechanics. So he's very scientific, which paired well with us. So yeah, basically his perspective was that when you ski, you need to stay perpendicular to your ski. I'm just going to expand a bit on the skateboard ramp analogy that Thomas went through earlier. So basically, if you think of the different stages of the turn, when you start a turn, your skis are sideways across the mountain. And this is essentially a relatively flat surface as your skis are flat. As you continue to start the turn, your skis get steeper and steeper and steeper until they're facing down what we call the fall line, which is the steepest part of the slope. So, and then as you come out and finish the turn, you then transition back into a flat state as your skis are going across the mountain. So to stay perpendicular to your ski, you have to adjust to these the relative slope throughout the turn. So as you're starting the turn, you need to make sure that you're shifting forwards to keep yourself over your bindings. I'm just going to quickly explain what happens if you don't do this to help you understand it. So if you don't maneuver your body forwards at the start of the turn, it means that when you do reach the steepest point of the slope, you're essentially going to be in the back seat with lots of pressure on your tails, on the tails of your ski, which means it's very difficult to actually turn the ski when you have lots of tail pressure. So yeah, you need to make sure that you're moving forwards in order to turn the ski at the start. But as you then come out of the turn, if you stay forwards, it means that you'll continue to turn too much and your tails will actually wash out. So there's this, quite nuanced movement of adjusting to the terrain and moving forwards at the start of the turn to make sure you can enter the turn and then moving smoothly back to avoid your tails washing out. So yeah, basically these are the chats that we were having with Tom, and he's got a great YouTube video with us that runs through this. But obviously we wanted to go and look at the data to see if this was actually happening or not. And when we looked at the movements of the center of pressure, this is exactly what we saw. We saw skiers moving smoothly and decisively forwards and then back again. But during our work, we actually noticed that the center of pressure dot was moving side to side as well. Specifically at the start of the turn, it was moving towards the edge in contact with the snow. So as your ski was tipping over, the pressure would be aligned with that edge in contact with the snow. So yeah, we had these two movement patterns, and we initially had two metrics that we called forward balance and foot roll. But we now have three, and if we go to the next slide, I will talk you through those metrics. So yeah, as we've discussed, at the start of the turn, the great skiers were decisively moving forwards and sideways towards the inside of the turn. And we noticed this was the only time that they were doing this during the turn. So taking a step back from the data and thinking about what this is for your skiing, what this looks like is someone moving diagonally across their skis during the transition. So as you finish the turn, a great skier will kind of be throwing themselves diagonally over their skis. And this is exactly what you can see in this heat map here in the GIF. So the pressure is starting at the back, and then it moves further forwards and towards the inside. So this would actually be a turn towards the left. Yeah, and then after the start of the turn, skiers then gradually and smoothly move backwards, and crucially this was the only time that they'd be moving backwards. So we broke down these two movement patterns into three metrics, the first one being what proportion of your total forward movement during the turn happened at the start of the turn, and this is what we call balance start of the turn. The next one looked at that inside movement, so what proportion of your inside movement happened at the start of the turn, and we called this topple due to that toppling, due to the inside movement being caused by you toppling over your skis in transition. Like if a tree's been knocked down, it then kind of falls and topples over. And then finally, what proportion of your backwards movement happened after the start of the turn, and this is what we call balance end of the turn. So yeah, we use proportions because the amount of forwards and backwards movement depends on the terrain type and the turn type. One example of this is the steeper the terrain, the more you need to move forward. So if you think of the relative slopes I was talking about, the steeper the terrain, the steeper it's going to get when your skis are facing down the mountain, and that means you need to be moving forwards more. So yeah, that was why we used proportions. So if you're on a fairly mellow slope, you don't need to move forwards that or backwards as much, but there is still crucially forward movement at the time that we're looking for it from the best skiers.
Whilst we're on that, I've had a few questions come into the Q&A that seem best time to ask now around the exact timing of those movements. So when is start of turn, when is end of turn, and how does that relate to like the apex and the movement of the turn itself?
Yeah, great question. So we use the first 20% of the turn to be the start of the turn, and that's measured by your the duration of the turn, basically. So we're just taking that first 20%, and how that relates to the apex. The start of the turn, we typically see the apex in Carv being around 30 to 40%, but obviously it depends on how quickly you rotate the ski. If you are doing like a Z turn, which is when you're skiing along and they're suddenly changing all in one motion, that can change the moment that your skis are facing down the mountain. But if you're doing a nice carving turn, typically 30 to 40% we'll see it through there.
Perfect, thank you.
Great. Cool. So yeah, now I've got some great data that I want to run past you all. So first of all, let me just explain what these graphs are showing. So on the x-axis, the bottom axis, is showing the percentage through the turn, and then on the y-axis is basically how far forwards and backwards you are as a skier relative to your own skiing. So this skier on the left is actually Thomas, and this is absolutely beautiful data. When we see this type of skiing, we know it's an expert, and obviously this is reflected in his high ski IQ of 155. But coming back to balance, what we see is here his forward movement is smooth and decisive all at the start of the turn, and at no other point during the rest of the turn is he moving forwards. And likewise, the backwards movement is all happening after the start of the turn. And yeah, reflected in his great metric scores there of 90 and 87 for start and end of the turn. The skier on the right is more of a kind of beginner intermediate skier. And the first thing to notice is that the forward movement is much later on. It's not until 30% through the turn for one of those turns, and that's going to penalize the score. But also, that's not the only time that there's forwards and backwards movement. There's other movement throughout the rest of the turn, which indicates that they're off balance and kind of having to adjust, and they're not in control like Thomas is of his movements. So this is a kind of look behind the scenes of how we've come up with the metric and what we're measuring there. So if we move on to the next slide. So here we've got another one of our ambassadors. This is from Morgan. Many of you on the Facebook community will have seen his comments. He came out to ski with us in Austria last season. Amelia, if you could just keep pressing play on that video. So yeah, this is our internal video tool that basically allows us to match video sessions with the live replay of the force under the foot here. So what we can see is through the graph on the left is that he moves forwards in a very similar way to Thomas, in a smooth, decisive manner. And when you're looking at the video, you can see that the sensors at the top of the insole lighting up as he's starting the turn, and then the heel lights up afterwards. So yeah, this is excellent skiing. This one is an advanced skier. So looking at the graph to start with, we can see, they are moving forwards, but they are moving forwards a bit later, and it continues on past the 20% of the turn cutoff that we are looking at. And it also, it's not the only time that they're moving forwards. There's little kinks in the line later on. All of this will play a part in getting a slightly lower score. And you can see the skiing being done on the left. It's pretty advanced, nice kind of carvy parallel turn. And again, you can see the sensors at the top of the insert lighting up as he starts to turn, and then the heel. But the crucial element is the timing here, and the fact that the control isn't quite up there compared to the best skiers. And then comparing the advanced skiing to an intermediate skiing, what we can see again is that the intermediate skiing is still even later than the advanced skiing, and there's just more noise in the data. So there's more forwards and backwards movement, which is going to hurt the metrics. And as I've said before, that means they're not in control. They're off balance during the turn. And that's all going to count towards a lower balance score. So I hope you enjoyed that deep dive into some of the data. In the data science team, we love those graphs. They've been instrumental in helping us design the metrics and analyze skiing. So I'll pass over to the others now.
It's funny that you say that, because I had a little sneaky feeling that as soon as we showed those graphs in this webinar, that people would jump in saying, I want those graphs, I want those graphs. Sadly, to answer the questions that have come in live for you now, they are not available for the Carv app. Charlie has to work some magic in the background to make those, and they're not as easy as just switching on for you to see. If only, though. They are very cool. Okay, I will hand over to Kevin and Thomas. Thank you very much, Charlie, and take it away, the Aspen pros.
Hey, Charlie, thank you. That was amazing. Always fun to hear your insights and learning something every time. Amelia, can you take that to the next slide, please? So Kevin and I went through what is it that we're seeing of movements that limits movements, or stances that limits movements. And we see people that are too far aft with their hip, and that means that their shins are totally upright and they're basically hanging on the back of their cuff. Okay. The other one's the opposite, where the shin moves so far forward. You've been told your whole life you need to be on the ball of your foot, and you are, and you're pressuring down on the shin. I'm one of the people who've been through this with blisters and no hair on my shins. But that means for maintaining balance, the spine opens up, and it's not a great place to be for balance.
I've launched that poll for you, Thomas, so you can see that what you're talking about now, actually back seat is the most painful of all, and followed by being too upright and forward, and then finally leading the inside leg as the ones that are most struggled with.
Yeah, so I'll keep going pretty fast.
Going,
that too wide a stance can limit a lot of movement. Too narrow can actually block your knee movements or your ankle movements shown in the knees. And one that I see a lot is the one where there's too much lead, and that means that the outside foot is weighted heavily on the front of the foot and on the shin, and the inside foot is on the heel. Maybe a way of balancing, because there is a way where you could balance inside that. But again, all of these kind of limits what can we do down here in the boot. And so the next one, the next slide kind of shows some of the things that we believe in is and Charlie mentioned it, how can we stand more on the bottom of our foot and pressure instead of pressuring quite far away from the snow on the top of our shin. And I put this picture in of a telemark skier because back in the late 90s, I was trying telemarking, and one day I was out skiing with friends of mine, and they were alpine skiing, and I said, hey, just you know, shin, spine, all needs to be parallel, kind of like this, and I skied off, and I almost fell, and it happens a couple of times, and that day I found out that I was so heavily weighted on the shin of my cuff that, as I said before, I had blisters, but the weight was so far forward. And one of the results in my skiing was that I pushed the heel out all the time because there was never any pressure on it. So I started standing more on the bottom of my foot, and I did a lot of skiing with my boots open and even the strap open. So it almost feel like I skied in a running shoe. No support up here unless when I laid it over sideways. So that was kind of my own little how to move my pressure down from this far off the snow to maybe an inch off the snow. Okay, so unlocking your stance is really, really important, but unlocking it to a position from where you can move. So the most important part is that we can move, but if the ankle is locked, if you're hanging on the shin, if it's too wide, too narrow, opposites, all of that can actually put you into a position from where you cannot move, and that'll limit your carb score.
I'd also add that, you know, a lot of times ski instructors, we have focused so much on the beginning of the turn, the start of the turn, and, you know, oh, you got to get forward, that we haven't done as good of a job as we could have to look at how we get out of the turn. And similar to Thomas, same thing with me in the sense of I was always taught, you know, shin pressure and, you know, really feel the front of your boot. And I was doing that at the end, but as you saw with Charlie, and that was awesome, Charlie, because those graphs and the data, like it shows what Carv's actually looking at. So it's a really cool tool to use that to help you improve your score, but also know why you're trying to improve it, right? So it says, you know, moving forward at the start of the turn and then moving back. Sometimes moving back is like a huge myth of like, wait a minute, like my ski instructor has always told me to move forward. Well, yeah, you have to kind of back off the front of the boot or kind of back off because you need a place to move forward to, or you need a place to move forward from. So if you're always forward, like to Thomas's point, just to reiterate it, if you're always crushing the front of the boot and really feeling the shin pressure, you don't really have any other options. So one of the things that the balance metric does is gives you a little bit more options, and that was pretty cool. We can go to the next slide, Amelia.
Yeah, and if we look at that top right.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, not quite sure what happened there. Sorry about that. I'm gonna jump into that again.
One of the things that one of the pictures will show is how I put a bamboo stick on the ground and had some of my, it was at the National Academy at Breckenridge. I had some of the strong ski instructors I skied around with stand on that bamboo stick and feel the pressure being more on the front of the heel instead of more on the ball of their foot. And I'm talking about it like more biomechanically. If you go into a squat with in the gym, you're also being asked by your coach, or most of us know that the strongest position is when you are on that front of the heel. If you go up on the table and jump down, you don't want to land on the front of your foot. That will hurt on your face. So a really strong position where we can move is that front of the heel. From there, we can move in all directions.
Is this where you'd like me to be, Kevin, and someone to check? This one?
So that top right is where we're practicing standing on that pole. The other one is more a matter of showing that there are different ways of moving fore and aft. We don't necessarily have to move around our ankle joint, as I'm showing here. We could also move around our knee joint and basically move the base instead of moving a lot of center of mass up here. I did this drill with one of my clients here indoor and took some pictures, because what he's showing is the move of changing the angles of his lower leg. I call it the soccer kick through the turn, getting forward at the top of the turn and more towards the heel, front of the heel at the end of the turn. And we'll see David a little bit more, but these are things that you could do at home and indoor, learning to move so you'll be in a dynamic balanced position or more.
And so there's a little bit of a progression here of some of these things that you can do inside, but again, what is it going after? It's going after that balance, the metric score of helping to move forward at the start of the turn and then moving, slightly back towards the end of the turn. So Amelia, if you go to the next one, we're going to show you some stuff you can do on snow. So here's just a couple drills. So on the left, you have me, I have my boots unbuckled. They're still, they're clasped, but they're just a little bit unbuckled, and I have my power strap a little unbuckled. And to Thomas's point, what I'm doing there is I'm just making some basic parallel turns. I'm going a little slower, and all I'm trying to do is just feel, how does the snow kind of move underneath my foot, if that makes sense. So like how am I moving over, and really trying to pay attention to kind of my foot. So that's one thing that you can do that may help. Again, we're just going to put it out there. It's a little challenge by choice. You're going to want to find some flatter terrain. If you don't feel comfortable doing it, then don't do it. But it is one thing that you can do, because now you don't have, you're not like locked into the ski boot as much. So you have a little bit more range on purpose to try to teach, what am I feeling? What am I sensing in my boots? So that's the picture on the left, or the video on the left. On the right, what you can do is you can either now, you can keep your boots unbuckled if you want, or you can buckle them. But the idea there is it's actually doing a shuffle, but I like to call it like almost like a double shuffle. So I'm trying to move my skis, underneath me fore and aft, and fore and aft. And I should be able to do that through a turn. And again, I'm trying to minimize the terrain, so I'm taking it onto easier terrain. This is pretty flat. Over here is at Breckenridge. People may ask, I'm on a 165 slalom ski. That's what I'm in. I'm in a World Cup 3 Raptor boot, so it's a race boot. But those are some options that you can do here. And the other thing that you can also use is the 4F monitor with Carv, which will give you some real live data as to where are you in terms of where, what is your percentage of moving forward. So again, it goes by percentages. So, is it 90% at the start of the turn? And then to Charlie's point, within that 20% of the first part of the turn. So there's a lot of percentages in there, but that's something that you can use to help with these. And this will build on a progression. Amelia, you can go to the next slide.
Actually, okay. I'd love to just say, before we see Kevin doing dolphin turns, I'd love to say that the progression might be from inside doing the soccer turn to stand outside doing a shuffle. Just feeling how you can glide your skis back and forth without moving the body. Then doing that across the slope, back and forth, and then in a turn. And once you kind of got those, and open boots are definitely easier to move in. Once you got those, you could start doing double shuffle and into dolphin turn.
Yeah. So as a progression, some of the steps, this would be the more challenging one, and these are dolphin turns. So what I'm doing is I'm essentially doing, like, if you've ever seen a skateboard, they're essentially doing an ollie. So I am kind of leveraging the back of the tails of my skis, helping to bend it, and then I'm using that bend to help kind of propel me forward, and then I'm landing forward and I'm moving again. So I'm using a full range. I'm playing a lot with the fore aft in there. It's a lot harder to do. You do have to bend, and you have to be willing to, kind of leverage going back and forward. But that is what a dolphin does when they porpoise out of, out of the water. That's what they do. And that's a really good drill that you can use to help kind of just instill or kind of reinforce this whole idea of, am I moving forward, start of the turn, and starting to move back at the end of it. Amelia, you can go to the next one.
And when we teach this in our camps or in lessons, it's okay to feel that you're being thrown around. You got to get out of balance for a while, and then you'll learn to kind of, how can we do that more lower and not influence our body as much. But to begin with, it's definitely okay to feel that, oh my goodness, I'm being thrown around by myself here. Cool, you're doing it right.
And these drills, these activities, like all they're trying to do is just get you to move. And it might be a different way than you've moved in the past, but a little bit something you can do either with your students or you yourself, but it's something that you want to build up to before you kind of go for the full dolphin effect. But it comes in handy, if you need to jump over something, this is, you can do a dolphin turn.
Okay, we have at sign up that you were asked which one was the one that were really tough for you, and topple and the top of the turn were the two most, and I totally get that. That is
enough to say that that data on the screen is mine. It is also my weakest by a mile. Don't judge me. That was last week actually.
And I think it is, and I think they're super connected. So I'm glad that if it's called foot roll or topple, it doesn't matter, but they're connected to the start of the turn and the end of the turn and the movements you're doing there. Because if you don't have start and end of turn movements, it's really, really hard to topple. So I see a lot when I work with clients that are on Carv in lessons, that once we improve the movements of the soccer kick, getting people to stand more as a starting point to that front of the heel, from there we can move. And suddenly from there, we can also move sideways. Because when we're looking at a carb unit, we're suddenly measuring across, but I really like the first footbed that Charlie showed, that went from the inside of the front of the foot to the heel. Because that for me is the diagonal that you're moving on as you move forward into the new turn. And when you add that diagonal, you get to that early edge. And if you're toppling, you're getting early edge. So early edge becomes a result of you toppling at the right time. And you see a picture of Thomas Mikkel, another one of our coaches here at CTI. He's really moving in on that picture, and his chest is pointing down the hill or towards, maybe even towards what we call apex, as Charlie described, where the skis are straight down the hill, but his skis are still skiing away from him. And that's where Kevin has a great way of showing it with a pole here. So
if you guys can see this.
that's where we topple.
People have asked a lot of questions like, what is topple? And like what's happening is if this is downhill, so downhill is this way, my skis are actually going this way, like they are going away from me, as my center of mass is literally toppling over, and I'm pretty much kind of falling down, but then my skis actually bend and they're going to come back and somewhat catch me. Okay, so that's like very simple, and we're using some cue words here to kind of explain how it happens without trying to get like super deep into the physics. But basically, take a ski pole and you think of the ski pole as like the center of mass is a little higher in a ski pole because of the grip. And so the topple, a lot of people just think, the topple is boom coming down this way. Well, you got to remember that your skis are also going away from you. So it's one of these where it goes like that. And so as the skis are going this way and the center of mass is going that way, that's how I've been able to kind of describe toppling better to some people. So it's like center of mass is kind of falling this way, but skis going that way. And then what's going to happen is they come around the corner, they're going to catch back up and it kind of catch me from falling.
So it's basically it's an anticipated fall where you catch yourself, and that's a hard thing to do. It's hard to allow. I had a hard time finding this and allowing myself to get out of control. So I'm also a golf pro, and sometimes you swing better and you swing harder if you're not controlling your muscles but letting go. And that was what needed to happen for me, was a feel. And if you go to that next one, Amelia. Yeah, so here's some of the comments from the community. On the top left, I try to show what Kevin just explained, how that the skis go more across the hill while my body go a little more down the hill. This is actually a drill that I would suggest you guys trying if topple is a challenge for you. And if you look closely at my ski tips, the uphill ski tip from here is in front of the downhill, where most people have already shifted to an inside ski lead, and we're only just after edge change right here. But trying to come out from edge change, from the last turn in a position where you're facing down the hill, and then maintaining that inside lead as you edge into to the new turn. That helps the body go in the direction towards the apex, and it helps us get an early edge. What you want to remember is right at that point, you want to put them on edge and see it, hope they come back. They don't, you're going to have to twist them back. But if we don't trust that, or if we're not in a forward position, it's really hard to get the edge. So that's the moving across. I'm pulling my skis back a little bit or loading my soccer turn. And then I'm facing more towards the apex so that my body can go the shortcut and my skis go out and away. A way to commit to that is what I do at the bottom, where I try to put my poles in on the flat terrain and let the knees come in, okay? Once you've done that a couple of times, you could actually lift the poles and be prepared to catch yourself, but then just tip your knees at the same time and kind of catch yourself, because you could do that. I'm just gonna show here. You could get from one edge to the other without getting out of balance. And then we topple afterwards. So it's a good way. I've been lucky to ski with one of the best Japanese skiers, demonstrational skiers, Takao. Takao is up here on the top right corner. I borrowed this picture from our friends at Rookie Academy down in New Zealand. And here it shows how much he tries to tip his ankles and his feet, showing in the knees how much angulation there is from knees and hips here, and how his chest points more inside and towards apex, not after the ski tips. So those are a couple of drills that I think that most of us can help understand. Hopefully you could understand this better, what topple is, moving across. But the other one is getting something that you could actually do here on the floor, but also in ski boots out on the snow. I'll show you one thing here, because I cut up my ski boot, and you could see in here how there's I've been grinding stuff away. There's a big hole in here, and that's because when people say that you can't move in your ski boots, at least I don't think that's right, because I could tip my foot so much in my ski boot, and I'm in a 150 plug boot. But I need to make some adjustments for my little bones that are sticking out on my feet when I really tip my feet inside my boots. Yeah. So, anything on that?
I think, like, in the interest of time, what we should do is, Amelia, we'll keep moving, but I think we're gonna. Here's one.
Yeah, it was what I said before. David, again, topple is closely related to fore and aft. So once he found the fore and aft, you see the arrows I put down on his shins. That I send this video to him every day after we ski together. And suddenly, look at the right one. And David won't mind. I can tell you that he's turning 70 this month. So that's pretty amazing that he can do high edge angles. If we do the next one, Amelia, it shows that once we got him moving, his balance scores got from 59 to 74. But look at how much he got from the start of the turn, because he wasn't hanging anymore in his boots. He started moving, and then suddenly topple just came by itself. Obviously, it was guided by what we were doing with drills, but toppling just moved right into the green area. So I encourage you to start moving while skiing.
All right, so we know we don't have a ton of time, because thanks to Charlie for walking us through how the metric. I actually learned a lot of how stuff was measured. But we do have time for maybe a couple questions, and then if we don't do a question, what we'll do is we'll figure out a way to answer them maybe in the Carv community, or Amelia has our information, and we'll get back to you. So we definitely want to make sure that you guys get all the questions answered that you want. If we run time today, then
Sure. Thank you both so much. And quite a few questions have come in, as you saw by my occasional lack of screen share and restarting. Trying to type answers to them and navigate the screen share is not a strength of mine. But there quite a few have come through that would be great to have you answer live if possible, specifically around topple. So Gio has asked, how do you keep outside ski pressure whilst working on toppling?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think to begin with, I wouldn't worry about the outside ski pressure. But as you start kind of getting more familiar with that roll, sideways roll from the heel towards the toes, you will also start to move down and in. And that means that inside leg's got to be flexed away. So I think it'll come automatically with getting on earlier edges, you being able to move in and down, and creating space for you yourself to move in and down is by flexing that new inside knee and ankle.
Perfect. I'm just going to go back to my notes for a few more questions. A leap turn versus a dolphin turn, back to that drill that you were explaining. What's the difference there?
yeah, good question. So a leaper turn, like how I would talk about a leaper turn, is basically like as I come through the end of the turn, I'm basically going to try to, because I've bent the ski, I'm going to use that energy in the ski to lift me up, and then I'm going to land on the new set of edges over here. That's a leaper. The difference between that and the dolphin turn is the dolphin turn, I'm really trying to load up on the back towards the end of the turn, and then I'm using that bend back here to kind of lift me up into the turn. And when I land, I'm landing forward down here. So I'm actually trying to bend the tip when I land. It's super hard to see because if we slow mode that dolphin turn, but it's more about the leverage. So I'm leaning back where I have a little pressure aft at the end of the turn, and then I'm leaning forward when I land. So I kind of do one of these bending up in there. Does that make sense? Versus leapers just changing edges in the air.
Yeah, that makes sense. Charlie, I'm actually going to put a question to you now. I think I know the answer to it, but I wanted to check before I replied. Stuart has asked whether topple is purely measured by pressure data and the roll rate as you're going across, or if it also includes data from the accelerometers.
It's purely pressure. So we're just using those sensors to estimate your center of pressure, and it's that movement sideways. So yeah, nothing to do with the motion data.
Nice. And final two questions that I'm going to ask now, back to our Aspen pros. How far is toppling affected by speed? I feel like speed can make it seem like topple is all right because it forces the load, but and this asker Mikkel actually finds that he gets better scores in topple when he's going quite fast.
I'd say that makes sense because topple might be the first part, but then you're toppling into angulation and measuring that. So we often, those two are also really related, correct, Charlie? Luckily, you're nodding. But I think if we think of toppling, we think not only toppling across the foot from side to side, but then it moves into how high an edge angle can we get, how are we angulating, how do we get out of turn. So suddenly it becomes more than that. But in reality, it's only that first part of the foot roll or edge change that's the toppling part. But it is a crucial part, and it's easier to catch yourself if you have a little speed for the ski to come back. So I agree, speed has an impact, but I think for measurement, it shouldn't necessarily. What do you think, Charlie, or what do you say, Charlie?
Yeah, no, I'd agree. You know, edge angles related to speed, so you need higher edge angles to cope with the speed and the force in the turn, which in turns means that you're probably needing to topple more, which then will be leading to more decisive data, which, as I went through earlier, should lead to higher scores.
Perfect. And final question. It's quite a big one. So I think I'm going to suggest that this person also posts it on the Carv group on Facebook so that a bit of a discussion can start. But it's around the impact of the upper body, particularly head, arms, hands on balance. Don't even know where you would start with that one.
Well, I think, so I think a lot of times there's this common, you hear it a lot, like a stable upper body, and we've talked a little bit about stability and balance. And so a lot of times like a quiet or a stable upper body, it looks a lot like there's nothing happening. Like there's a lot of muscles firing, and back to Thomas's like visuals. Yeah. Like the great skiers, I like this comment of like the great skiers kind of move. Well, they're moving a lot down here. They might actually be resisting some of those like internally, some of the forces through here when they're doing stuff. So even though they don't see like a lot of stuff going on over here, quiet, that stable upper body. One of the things that can happen with that, or what I'm trying to say is like, really good skiers have figured out how to kind of use this part of their body to move against this part, right? And that's something that if we had more time, we could go in there, but it's a good discussion question. But I would say it's the idea that everything can move, but you may not be seeing a lot of movement, but there's a lot of stuff either muscularly firing, things happening. The arm carriage is actually pretty important, but it's kind of more of like after effect versus like the root cause. It could be the cause, but yeah.
I think when we're talking about balance, it's really hard to do any balancing act, even standing on one leg or the front of your foot balancing, if you don't have your arms. So I think they're a big part of moving, and I love what you're saying, that the core and the rib cage are moving as well. And I think the better skiers are putting their body into a position where it's already in balance, where if you don't, you drop your arm. If you don't, you gotta save yourself. But the ones where it looks like it's really easy, because they're really good at putting their body into that position before they need to, or at the moment where they need to. So
it may also look like a lot of times like they're not really doing much, but that's because they've actually aligned their upper body or whatever they need to the forces. And now that gives them some options where they can decide what they want to do next, right? And so sometimes even like the quieter, it looks like they're not doing anything. They actually are. They just haven't done it yet, if that makes sense.
Perfect.
and if put it out on the community, and we'll be happy to share more thoughts there.
Thank you, guys. And another question came through that I do want to mention, which was, is this the right link to sign up to Carv camps in Aspen? And it was in fact the right link, but Thomas, I will hand over to you to give a little bit more info on that.
Yeah, thank you, Amelia. Yes, as we said earlier, this is new this year. I've started an affiliate with Aspen Skiing Company, and I hired some of the best coaches and best carb skiers in the world. I'm really proud of the product. We are doing a Black Friday sale starting Thursday. The ad will come out today. It is called CPI, Carb Performance Institute.ski. You could also go carbperformanceinstitute.com. It will take you to the same page. And it's Carb Performance Institute on Instagram and Facebook. So I hope we have some interest on that as well, but that's not why we're here. But thank you, Amelia.
I think the most amazing thing for us for seeing you start that, Thomas, was the fact that we were out in Aspen working as a team this season, season gone, last season now, and Aspen dominated the leaderboard. And now all of those pros have come together, including Kevin, Thomas, Damien, like hundreds of you guys, really, all throughout the resort. And what are you, how many are in the team now? 8, 10?
Six pros, and we got other people asking if they could join, but we need to do some camps first and get a solid base, and then we'll see where it takes us. We're very excited for this season.
But if you scroll to the top of the leaderboard, that's who's there. So it really is learn from the best. Very exciting project.
Educators, but we also want someone that could demo and show what we're trying to teach whoever's on the camps or doing the lessons. So it's a combo of great people, great skiers, and strong educators.
And people are already asking in the Q&A if you're going to be coming to Europe, but I think that's probably for later on. Perfect. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Kevin and Thomas, for all your expertise, and Charlie for going that deep dive into the data. It's always so interesting to go back through those graphs, and I love doing it. And I think everyone else on the event did too, from the applauses and thumbs up that are coming through as reactions. Thank you everyone for joining, and we will be sending around the email with the recording in the morning, so a few hours time. You will be getting that to your inbox. And yeah, please give us a shout on the Carv Skiers community if you have any questions. If your Q&A wasn't answered, I'm very sorry. There are quite a few in there that I didn't get to. Please, if you want it answered by pros or by other members, pop them on the group. And that is all for today.
And Amelia, this is the first of a series of 4, correct?
Yes, good point. So this is the first, obviously, balance webinar, and we will be doing edging, rotary pressure at later dates throughout the season. But so yeah, this is the first in a great series to come. Cool, and have a lovely rest of your day, evening, wherever you are, and thank you very much for joining. Bye everyone.